Masih mute, Prof.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. Ato. Nanti sama saya.
Tes. To all participants of this fifth ICLG, I would like to inform that the opening ceremony will begin soon, and I would like to remind to mute the microphone during the opening ceremony. Thank you. Welcome to the Rector of Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University Jakarta, Professor Dr. Haja Aminul Lubis. And also welcome to all speakers, invited speaker and participant of the 5th ICLG. I would also gratefully welcome to Her Excellency Tuanku Raja Perempuan Perlis. Thanks for coming to this 5th ICLG, the Faculty of Sharia and Law, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta. Attention please to all participants of 5th ICLG. The opening ceremony will begin soon. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Opening ceremony, the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice, the Faculty of Sharia and Law, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin, wa bihi nasta'in ala umurid dunya waddin, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Honorable Rector of Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta, Professor Dr. Hajah Amani Lubis MA, Honorable Dean Faculty of Sharia and Law, Dr. Ahmad Tolabi Harli SH MA MH, Honorable Invited Speaker of the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice, Professor Dr. M. Ato Muzhar, MSPD from UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, Professor Dr. Mashkuri Abdullah from UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, Professor Timothy Lindsay from the Melbourne University, Australia, Professor Dr. Ahmad Hidayat bin Buang from University Malaya, Malaysia, Professor Livia Holden from Oxford University, United Kingdom, Professor Najma Musa from University of the Cape Town, South Africa. Especially Professor Dr. Haji Ma'ruf Amin, the Vice President of Republic Indonesia. Honorable Vice Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Syahrul Adam MAG, Vice Dean of Administration Affairs, Dr. Muhammad Maksum MA MDC, and Vice Dean of Student and Cooperation Affairs, Dr. Haja Maskufa MA. Honorable Head and Secretary Study Program, Islamic Family Law, Comparative Law, Sharia Economic Law, Islamic Constitutional Law, Islamic Criminal Law, Islamic Legal Studies, and Master of Islamic Family Law, Master of Sharia Economic Law. Distinguished guests and participants of this international conference, first of all praise be to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has given us all salvation and blessing in life, the Lord who created this world. Secondly, salawat and salam to our beloved Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who give goodness in the world, in the life of faith and knowledge, and save the human life from destruction in the safety. That's the right path of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice, organized by Faculty Sharia and Law, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta, with has theme Sharia, Law, and Sustainability in the New Normal, the nexus between legal and economic development toward inclusive justice. Wednesday, October 13, 2021, in the digital conference room. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin this opening session by saying Basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Reciting Al-Quran by Ragib Muhammad Saho, the student of Comparative Law.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويوم نبعث في كل أمة شهيدا عليهم من أنفسهم من أنفسهم وجئنا بك شهيدا على هؤلاء ونزلنا عليك الكتاب بيانا لكل شيء وهدى ورحمة وبشرى للمسلمين. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. صدق الله العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The national anthem of Indonesia Raya. Prayer will be led by K. Haji Kosim Arsadad MA.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan na'imin, hamdan yuafi ni'amahu wa yukafi'u mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu wa lakal syukru kama yanbaghi li sultanik. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Allahumma ij'al jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma waj'al tafarruqana min ba'di tafarruqan hasanan ma'suma. Allahumma hassil maqasidana wa balligh muradana waqdi hajatina innaka ala kulli syai'in qadir. Allahumma arinal haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'a wa arinal batila batila warzuqna ijtinaba. Rabbana hab lana min azwajina wa dhurriyyatina qurrata a'yun waj'alna lil muttaqina imama. Rabbana la tuzigh qulubana ba'da idh hadaitana wa hab lana min ladunka rahmatan innaka antal wahhab. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adzaban nar. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thanks for Vice Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Sarul Adam MAG, who lead this prayer this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call upon the Dean of Faculty Sharia and Law, Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta, Dr. Haji Ahmad Tolabi Kharli, SH, MAMH, to deliver his opening remark. The time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah. Assalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Faculty of Syariah and Law, Universitas Islam Negeri Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, I welcome you all to the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice 1991. The title for this year conference is Sharia, Law, and Sustainability in the New Normal, the nexus between legal and economic development toward inclusive justice. The COVID-19 undeniably has influenced many aspects of life. Various efforts have been made to maintain the stability of life and humanity. It is expected that we, as scholars, contribute to the recovery of our society through research to come up with solution and recommendation. ICLJ is an event where legal scholars from various institutions and countries meet together. This is such a valuable opportunity for us all as legal scholars to share ideas and research findings in this scientific forum. It is unfortunate that this 5th ICLJ is held online due to the difficult situation posed by COVID-19 pandemic. However, this situation becomes a blessing for us. The limited access to mobility has enabled us to invite distinguished speakers from different countries and continents. We will have Professor Tim Lindsay from the University of Melbourne, Australia, Professor Livia Holden from Oxford University, UK, Professor Ahmad Hidayat Buang from University of Malaysia, and Professor Najma Musa from the University of Western Cape, South Africa. It is also an honor for us to have Excellency Professor Kiai Haji Ma'ruf Amin, Vice President of Republic of Indonesia, Professor Amani Lubis, Rector of Universitas Islam Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, Professor Muhammad Atta Mudhar, and Professor Mashkuri Abdullah among the invited speakers. I would also gratefully welcome Her Excellency Tuanku Raja Perempuan Muda Perlis Malaysia. My greatest appreciation for their willingness to contribute to this conference. My appreciation goes to the committee for the hard work to make this conference happen. Last but not least, I would like to warmly welcome you all to this conference and thank you for your participation. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thanks to Dean Faculty of Sharia and Law, Dr. Haji Ahmad Talabi Kharli SH, MMH, who just delivered his opening remark this morning. Honorable speakers, distinguished guests, and participants, we hereby invite the Rector of Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University Jakarta to deliver her welcoming speech and open the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice officially. Professor Dr. Hajah Amani Lubis MA, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. His Excellency Professor Dr. Kiai Haji Ma'ruf Amin, Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia, Honorable Vice Rectors of Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta who attended this conference, Honorable Dean of Faculty of Sharia of Law, Bapak Dr. Ahmad Talabi Kharli, Honorable Deans and Director of Graduate School of Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, distinguished keynote speaker, invited speakers, Professor Dr. Atta Muzhar, Professor Dr. Mashkuri Abdullah, Professor Timothy Lindsay from University of Melbourne, Professor Dr. Ahmad Hidayat bin Buang from University Malaya, Malaysia, Professor Livia Holden from Oxford University, the United Kingdom, and Professor Najma Musa from the University of Western Cape, South Africa. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let's first express our gratitude to Allah the Almighty for all His blessings to us, so we can attend this 5th International Conference on Law and Justice, conducted by the Faculty of Sharia and Law, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, on Wednesday, 13th of October, 2021. Allow me to extend to you my heartfelt and warmest welcome to Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University Jakarta. On behalf of Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University Jakarta, I highly appreciate the Faculty of Sharia and Law for hosting this annual conference on Sharia law, sustainability in the new normal, the nexus between legal and economic development towards inclusive justice. During the COVID-19 pandemic, economic development all over the world has indeed shifted dramatically. The ways we interact with people dealing with legal matters, for instance, have changed to a level never witnessed before. In short, dealing with legal matters, economic transactions have transformed from conventional with offline transaction to online elements, to purely to e-commerce with forms of digital transformation. Yeah. In such situation, we do need newly innovative ways in dealing with real Islamic law challenges in the new normal life caused by pandemic, including the most effective ways in integrating technologies to legal and economic practices at all levels. It's interesting to observe that Sharia rule of law based on Maqasid Sharia has provided strong basis for inclusive justice and development. The rise of Islamic economics and finance based on the profit loss sharing scheme has been in line with the current global transformation market, with the emergence of Industrial Revolution 4.0 and the Society 5.0, as well as the digital world. The COVID-19 pandemic momentum might provide an invaluable lesson learned that creating wealth and prosperity must be carried out with due diligence to the social welfare and environment's sustainability. Otherwise, it will lead to catastrophic disasters that bring negative impacts to all aspects of human life. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University as a public university has a strong commitment to fully support its faculty members and students in pursuing academic excellence through networking, cooperation, and partnership initiatives. International conferences like this, initiated and organized by faculty of Sharia and law and other faculties, play a strategic role in promoting and enhancing such academic excellence in order for the Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University to become a world-class university with an integrated teaching of Islam, science, and nationhood to achieve sustainability in the new normal. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice, conducted by the Faculty of Sharia and Law, only achieves success with the great support and contribution of the keynote speaker, invited speakers, reviewers of the papers, parallel speakers, and all the participants. Allow me to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude for your important contribution. To conclude, I wish you all a fruitful deliberation and insight from this international conference. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks to Professor Dr. Hajah Amanilubis MA, who just officially delivered her welcoming speech and also opened the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice. May Allah bless our international conference today. Amin ya Rabbal Alamin. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable speakers, distinguished guests and participants, and now we are going to hear the keynote speech from Professor Dr. K. Haji Maruf Amin as the Vice President of Republik Indonesia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawala. Yang saya hormati Rektor dan Sivitas Akademika UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, Dekan Fakultas Syariah dan Hukum UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, para pembicara, tamu undangan, dan hadirin yang saya muliakan. Pertama-tama marilah kita panjatkan puji dan syukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa taala yang telah memberikan rahmat dan karunia-Nya bagi kita semua sehingga kita dapat hadir pada acara The 5th International Conference on Law and Justice yang diselenggarakan oleh Fakultas Syariah dan Hukum UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta. Saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Rektor, Dekan Fakultas Syariah dan Hukum UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta yang telah mengundang saya untuk menjadi keynote speaker dalam forum yang membanggakan ini. Penyelenggaraan acara yang sangat penting ini di tengah-tengah ketidakpastian pandemi COVID-19 merupakan hal yang luar biasa, apalagi mengangkat topik hukum syariah ke dalam diskursus akademik mengenai pentingnya ekonomi syariah bagi pemulihan ekonomi Indonesia pasca COVID-19. Konferensi ini mengangkat topik syariah, hukum, dan keberlanjutan dalam new normal, keterkaitan antara pembangunan hukum dan ekonomi menuju keadilan inklusif. Pandemi ini telah memaksa kita semua untuk fokus saling menjaga satu dengan yang lain dan beradaptasi terhadap tantangan baru, sehingga perlu adanya kerjasama dan kolaborasi dalam menghadapi keadaan new normal tersebut. Kondisi baru ini juga diharapkan tidak hanya kita mampu bertahan dari pandemi, tapi mampu melakukan lompatan dan terobosan untuk kemajuan ekonomi, termasuk ekonomi dan keuangan syariah. Sambutan saya hari ini akan fokus pada bagaimana industri keuangan Islam dapat mempromosikan ekonomi yang berkelanjutan. Keuangan Islam telah mencatat pertumbuhan tercepat di industri keuangan global, di mana salah satu pilarnya adalah kepercayaan dan kerjasama. Kepercayaan dan kerjasama tersebut berdiri di atas landasan etis yang merupakan prinsip dasar dari pengaturan dalam bermuamalah menurut ajaran Islam, serta sasarannya untuk mewujudkan kemaslahatan dan menghindarkan kemudaratan, jalbul masalih wa dar'ul mafasid. Hadirin yang berbahagia, ketika kita mendengar kata berkelanjutan, biasanya kita mengkaitkannya dengan model bisnis berkelanjutan atau pengelolaan lingkungan hidup secara berkelanjutan. Saya percaya bahwa topik konferensi ini hendak mengambil sudut pandang yang lebih luas dalam mengatasi tantangan yang lebih mendasar, yaitu bagaimana kita hidup dalam masyarakat dengan tatanan baru, new normal. Situasi new normal ini juga telah memaksa kita untuk mengubah tata cara menjalankan kegiatan ekonomi, termasuk ekonomi syariah. Kata berkelanjutan juga dapat diartikan sebagai ketahanan. Tujuan dari Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) PBB adalah untuk memastikan masyarakat yang lebih tahan atau tangguh untuk bersama-sama menghadapi kesulitan. SDGs adalah upaya untuk mengakhiri kemiskinan global, membangun kehidupan yang bermartabat bagi semua orang tanpa kecuali, mendorong kemitraan, mengintensifkan upaya berbagi kemakmuran, memberdayakan penghidupan masyarakat dan memastikan perdamaian, dan menyembuhkan planet kita untuk kepentingan generasi saat ini serta generasi mendatang. Konsep SDGs dalam pembangunan ekonomi menggabungkan apa yang dikenal dengan triple bottom line atau 3P, yaitu people, planet, dan profit. Dalam 3P ini terdapat aspek sosial, lingkungan, dan keuangan dalam setiap kegiatan usaha. Kegiatan usaha harus membantu masyarakat, harus melestarikan planet, dan harus tetap menguntungkan. Nilai-nilai triple bottom line ini sungguhnya sesuai dengan hukum Islam, hukum syariah, bahkan merupakan tujuan dari hukum itu sendiri, yaitu yang disebut dengan maqasidus syariah. Maqasidus syariah merangkum 5 hal penting, yaitu memelihara agama, hifdzuddin, memelihara jiwa, hifdzun nafas, memelihara akal, hifdzul akal, memelihara keturunan, hifdzun nasl, dan memelihara harta atau hifdzul mal. Namun apabila kita mengamati perkembangan kehidupan di berbagai negara yang mayoritas penduduknya beragama Islam, yang sering terjadi konflik dan perang sehingga keamanan dan keselamatan jiwa selalu terancam. Dalam kaitan ini ada 2 hal lain yang saya kira memang perlu dimunculkan dalam konteks kekinian sebagai bagian dari maqasidus syariah, yaitu melindungi keamanan, hifdzul aman, dan perdamaian, hifdzus salam. Sesungguhnya kedua hal tersebut termasuk bagian dari hifdzun nafas, hifdzun nas, dan hifdzul mal. Tapi karena keamanan dan keselamatan ini merupakan ancaman nyata dan serius, serta sering terjadi, maka perlu dimasukkan sebagai bagian dari maqasidus syariah. Sehingga maqasidus syariah yang semula 5 hal bisa dikembangkan menjadi 7 hal, supaya ada perhatian lebih terhadap kedua masalah tersebut. Akhir-akhir ini ancaman terhadap perdamaian dan keamanan dunia tidak hanya bersifat militer. Ancaman juga dapat ditimbulkan oleh korporasi dan bisnis yang tidak memperhatikan kerusakan lingkungan dan kehidupan masyarakat, khususnya para pekerjanya. Sebagai contoh, pada tahun 2013 kita telah menyaksikan runtuhnya gedung Rana Plaza di Bangladesh, gedung yang menampung 5 pabrik garmen, menewaskan sekitar 1.132 orang dan melukai lebih dari 2.500 orang. Peristiwa ini menggambarkan pihak korporasi tidak memperhatikan keselamatan para pekerjanya dan tidak bertanggung jawab terhadap perlindungan mereka. Hal ini menunjukkan perlunya kerangka kerja yang menjamin keselamatan para pekerja sesuai juga dengan semangat maqasidus syariah. Hadirin yang saya hormati, jalan menuju keuangan berkelanjutan di Indonesia telah diatur melalui peraturan OJK nomor 51 /POJK /03/2017 tentang penerapan keuangan berkelanjutan bagi lembaga jasa keuangan, emiten, dan perusahaan publik termasuk lembaga keuangan syariah. Peraturan ini sejalan dengan tujuan dari maqasidus syariah. Prinsipnya tidak hanya mencari keuntungan, melainkan juga menjaga kemaslahatan dan menghindarkan kemudaratan bagi semua pihak. Dalam kesempatan ini saya hendak menyoroti 3 poin utama yang harus diprioritaskan oleh lembaga keuangan syariah untuk menerapkan keuangan berkelanjutan sesuai dengan peraturan OJK nomor 51 tersebut. Pertama, melalui pengembangan atau inovasi produk serta kegiatan yang sejalan dengan penerapan keuangan berkelanjutan. Ada beberapa industri dan proyek yang dinilai berkelanjutan menurut pedoman teknis OJK tentang penerapan keuangan berkelanjutan, antara lain kegiatan energi terbarukan, efisiensi energi, konservasi sumber daya alam, transportasi ramah lingkungan, pengelolaan air limbah, adaptasi perubahan iklim, dan lain-lain. Bank termasuk bank syariah wajib melakukan penyesuaian pengembangan, inovasi produk dan jasa yang meliputi peningkatan portofolio pembiayaan, investasi, atau proyek keuangan yang sejalan dengan keuangan berkelanjutan. Pada Maret 2018, pemerintah Indonesia menerbitkan Global Green Sukuk sebanyak 3 miliar US dollar. Penerbitan tersebut menjadi Green Sukuk pertama kalinya di dunia yang dilakukan oleh negara. Global Green Sukuk ini pun menarik perhatian dengan mencapai kelebihan penawaran sebanyak 2,5 kali. Selanjutnya pemerintah kembali menerbitkan Global Green Sukuk senilai total 2 miliar US dollar pada Februari 2019 dengan kelebihan permintaan sebanyak 3,8 kali. Pada tahun 2020 pemerintah menerima penghargaan sebagai penerbit sukuk hijau, Green Sukuk terbesar di dunia dari Climate Bond Initiative, dan ini merupakan penghargaan ke-12 bagi Indonesia dalam menerbitkan sukuk hijau yang menunjukkan bahwa Indonesia telah melakukan upaya untuk membiayai proyek dan sektor ramah lingkungan yang dianggap berkelanjutan. Hasil dari penerbitan sukuk hijau ini digunakan untuk membiayai proyek-proyek hijau pemerintah. Yang kedua, untuk mendorong ekonomi berkelanjutan dilakukan dengan mengembangkan kapasitas internal setiap lembaga dan organisasi keuangan syariah. Dalam pengembangan internal bank, hal utama yang harus dilakukan adalah mempersiapkan sumber daya manusia atau SDM yang memahami dan mampu menerapkan prinsip-prinsip keuangan berkelanjutan dan juga maqasidus syariah. Pengembangan SDM juga diarahkan untuk mendorong inovasi berbagai produk dan layanan keuangan berkelanjutan sebagai bagian dari upaya peningkatan layanan bank kepada nasabah. Bank harus meningkatkan kapasitas pegawainya untuk lebih memahami karakteristik dan keunggulan produk serta layanan keuangan berkelanjutan. Program ini mencakup antara lain karyawan yang bekerja di unit manajemen risiko, pengembangan bisnis dan layanan pelanggan. Bank dan lembaga keuangan harus memprioritaskan pengurus dan pegawai yang bertanggung jawab atas penerapan keuangan berkelanjutan. Sampai saat ini kondisi SDM pada industri keuangan syariah masih memerlukan peningkatan lebih lanjut untuk memenuhi tuntutan layanan keuangan yang berkelanjutan. Nah, yang ketiganya melakukan penyesuaian tata kelola organisasi yang meliputi struktur organisasi manajemen risiko dan standar operasional prosedur. Prinsip keuangan berkelanjutan juga harus disesuaikan dengan visi, misi, rencana strategis, struktur organisasi, serta penambahan tugas pokok dan fungsi terkait penerapan keuangan berkelanjutan. Proses penyesuaian dilakukan sesuai dengan prioritas bank. Bila diperlukan, bank harus melakukan penyesuaian terhadap tata kelola yang ada sehingga mampu mendukung pencapaian tujuan keuangan berkelanjutan. Hal ini termasuk menyesuaikan prinsip sistem analisa manajemen risiko dengan menambahkan komponen sosial, lingkungan, dan tata kelola ke dalam pertimbangan. Penyesuaian tersebut memerlukan sosialisasi yang disertai dengan program pengembangan kapasitas SDM bank agar tata kelola dapat diterima dan dilaksanakan dengan baik. Penerapan tata kelola yang transparan, akuntabel, bertanggung jawab, independen, setara, dan adil merupakan bagian dari peningkatan reputasi dan kredibilitas bank oleh pemangku kepentingan. Aspek tata kelola ini sangat penting karena bank dan lembaga keuangan Islam adalah wadah untuk mempromosikan prinsip-prinsip maqasidus syariah dan melayani kepentingan umat untuk memberikan dampak yang sebesar-besarnya bagi masyarakat dan lingkungan. Lembaga-lembaga ini juga harus menginternalisasikan semua nilai-nilai maqasidus syariah dan keuangan berkelanjutan dalam pengelolaan bank. Selanjutnya, sebagai bagian dari sistem keuangan global yang semakin menantang, tugas kita adalah memperkuat fondasi keuangan Islam atau keuangan syariah dan terus memperkuat struktur pendukungnya serta inovasi untuk memastikan bahwa keuangan Islam akan berkontribusi pada keseluruhan stabilitas sistem keuangan global dengan tetap menjaga kesesuaian dengan prinsip-prinsip maqasidus syariah. Saya berharap konferensi ini dapat menghasilkan lebih banyak ide tentang bagaimana kita dapat menerapkan ekonomi syariah lebih dari yang diharapkan, serta dapat mempercepat pemulihan ekonomi nasional yang terkontraksi akibat pandemi. UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta sebagai salah satu perguruan tinggi keagamaan Islam terbaik di Indonesia diharapkan dapat berkontribusi besar dalam penyiapan kader-kader terdidik yang siap terjun dalam pembangunan bangsa. Sekali juga UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta diharapkan dapat membantu pemerintah dalam penyiapan generasi muda yang memiliki pemahaman keagamaan yang moderat, wasatiyah, sehingga generasi muda dapat berkontribusi secara maksimal dalam penerapan ekonomi berkelanjutan sesuai dengan prinsip maqasidus syariah. Dengan mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, saya nyatakan the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice dibuka secara resmi. Selamat berkonferensi. Semoga Allah Subhanahu wa taala Tuhan yang Maha Esa senantiasa memberikan inayahnya dan meridai setiap ikhtiar yang kita lakukan. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks to the Excellency Professor Dr. Maruf Amin as the Vice President of Republic Indonesia, who just officially opened this 5th ICLJ, the Faculty of Syariah, UIN Jakarta. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of opening ceremony of the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice organized by the Faculty of Syariah, UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta, which has theme Sharia Law and Sustainability in the New Normal, the Nexus Between Legal and Economic Development Toward Inclusive Justice, Wednesday, October 13, 2021. Thanks for your presence, participation, and attention. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform you the next program of this conference. After we have opening ceremony, there will be invited speech one from Professor Dr. M. Ato Muzar, MSBD. And I will give the time to the person in charge, Dr. Muhammad Maksum, SHMA, or Mrs. Umi Kulsum, MPD, PhD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Dr. Mashrofa, as the Master of Ceremony. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we come to the invited speaker session. The first session will be delivered by Professor Dr. Muhammad Ato Muzar, MSPD, from Faculty of Sharia and Law, UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta. This session will be led by Bapak Nur Yamin Aini. Bapak Nur Yamin, time's yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank to Umi Kulsum inviting me to chair this session. Distinguished speaker, all party, all presenter, and all the participants. Now we will begin first plenary session. In this session, Professor Dr. M. Atta Muzhar will present a paper entitled The Fatwas of Indonesian and Singaporean Ulama on Friday Congregational Prayer in the era of COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Atta Muzhar is a prominent scholar in the field of the sociology of law. He earned his PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles. He initiated the study of the fatwa, MUI fatwa, and his work is hugely cited by the current scholar. All the participants, we have about 30 minutes, and I will divide it into two sessions. In the first part, we will give about 20 minutes to Professor Atta Muzhar to present his speech. And then about 10 minutes, we will open discussion, and to simplify, to organize the question, should the participant to ask the question, we recommended, we ask the participant to mention the question through the chat facility beneath your screen. Professor Atta Muzhar, you have about 20 minutes to present your paper, and then we will continue by discussion. Now, Professor Atta Muzhar, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa syukrulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia, Madam Rector, Excellencies, Honorable guests, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to participate in this webinar, and the theme of this seminar seems to be very wide, so I was given the liberty to choose my own topic, and my topic of my paper is the fatwas of Indonesian and Singaporean ulama on Friday congregational prayers in the era of COVID-19 pandemic. I have a paper written up, and I have submitted to the organizing committee, and I have asked them also to share it with you. I will go through only the main points of the paper. I might read out to you only the final part, the concluding parts of the paper. As an introduction, I mentioned that COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the world's population in all spheres of life, infections, death, change of cultural values and social behaviors in all segments of society, including religious rituals and religious leaders. Peoples of Indonesia and Singapore are no exception. This paper will undertake comparison of the behaviors of religious leaders of Indonesia and Singapore as represented by their fatwas on Friday congregational prayers during COVID-19 pandemic, especially in their legal pronouncements and their arguments within their respective social settings. For Muslims, Friday congregational prayers are of high importance because of their clear and direct injunctions in the Quranic verses and in the prophetic traditions. The Council of Indonesian Ulama, let me begin by Indonesian Ulama, has issued at least 3 fatwas related to Friday congregational prayers. I'll mention them briefly. The first fatwa was known as Fatwa Number 14 of 2020, issued on March 16, 2020. The fatwa stated that every individual has the obligation to make every effort to ensure his or her own safety. B, an individual who is already infected by COVID-19 virus must quarantine himself or herself and refrain from attending any communal religious rituals to avoid transmission. And then a healthy individual, according to the fatwa, must follow the following rules. First, a person who lives in areas of high rate of infections should not attend Friday congregational prayers and all daily communal prayers in the mosque, including the Ramadan evening prayers, the Tarawih. The fatwa also said that a person who lives in areas of low rate of infection is obliged to perform daily and Friday congregational prayers by observing all guidelines made by health authorities. There were a number of arguments to support the fatwa. These arguments are ranging from quotations of Quranic verses, prophetic traditions, legal maxims, and references to the works of scholars. Among the Quranic verses quoted was Surah Al-Baqarah 155. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Verily, we will test you by means of hunger, of danger, hunger, loss of wealth, loss of soul, and loss of fruits. Another verse from Al-Baqarah 195 was quoted, "Wala tulqu bi aydikum ila tahluka." Let's not your own hands throw you into destruction, and so on. Among the prophetic traditions quoted were the sayings of the Prophet, who said that, who warned people not to go to an endemic area and not to leave a village when it was undergoing an outbreak of disease. Some legal maxims quoted were, among other things, la darar wa la dirar, and dar'ul mafasid muqaddam ala jalbil masalih. Do not do harm to others and do not be harmed by others. Avoiding mafsadah, avoiding harms, must be given priority over the gaining of benefit. The references to the works of scholars were basically referring to An-Nawawi and Bafadal al-Hadrami, who said that rain, muddy road, sickness, caring for sick people, and fear of the safety of wealth are legitimate excuses for not attending Friday prayers. All in all, the fatwa was well argued, but it seemed concerned only with the legitimacy of skipping Friday congregational prayers. That was the first fatwa. The second fatwa was known as the Fatwa Number 31 of 2020, issued on June the 4th. This is after the period of loosening some previously restricted activities. The fatwa stated that safe physical distancing between imam and the congregants, the ma'mum, as well as among ma'mums, congregants, in a row is permissible. Wearing facial masks in praying is permissible. Mosques should not hold multiple rounds of Friday congregational prayers, as they are invalid. Should people need for such a second shift of Friday congregational prayers, they may do so in other places than the mosque. The fatwa did admit that there had been some disagreements among the fatwa committee members on the last issue, on the multiple rounds of Friday congregational prayers in a mosque. The arguments for the fatwa were also referring to a number of Quranic verses, prophetic traditions, legal maxims, references to the works of ulama, both classical and modern. In fact, this fatwa's arguments were more elaborate than the first one I mentioned. It might be worth noting here that classical writers did not seem to discuss the issue of multiple rounds of Friday congregational prayers, but modern writers such as Wahbah al-Zuhaili did discuss it and make it permissible if needed, while other modern writers such as Al-Jaziri did not discuss it at all. The third fatwa of the Council of Indonesian Ulama, Majelis Ulama Indonesia, was known as the Fatwa Number 28, issued on May 1st, 2021. This is on virtual Friday congregational prayers. The fatwa stated that virtual Friday congregational prayers were invalid because of the absence of al-ittihad, the unity of the venue, and al-ittisal, the spatial connectedness between the imam and the ma'mum. However, the fatwa stated also that hybrid virtual Friday congregational prayers, meaning prayers who are attended by imam and ma'mum in one place, but also attended by other ma'mums through internet networks. hybrid virtual Friday congregational prayers are valid for the Imam and the Ma'mum who meet the requirement of ittihad and ittisal. It is interesting to note that certain intellectuals of Indonesia advocated and even implemented the idea of virtual Friday congregational prayers. Such a question was never raised in Singapore. Let me now move on to the Singaporean fatwas. There were at least 2 fatwas related to this issue issued by the Majlis Ugama Islam Singapura, the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore. The first one was issued on February 16, 2020. Basically, the fatwa was about the temporary suspension of holding communal prayers and Friday congregational prayers in mosques in Singapore. This was at the beginning of the pandemic outbreak. The second fatwa was issued on June 15, 2020, as the Singaporean government just announced to enter second phase of loosening activities previously restricted. The fatwa said that Friday congregational prayers can be done, meaning valid, while observing safe distancing procedures. B, Friday congregational prayers can be done or valid more than once in a mosque, meaning a mosque may have multiple rounds of Friday congregational prayers. C, Friday congregational prayers can be carried out before zawal, before noon, before dhuhr time. D, implementation of compulsory booking system to ensure everyone to a slot in the mosque. And lastly, elderly, without specifying the age, either 70 or over, probably 60 or over, those who have chronic conditions, those who are worried about the safety of their families, and those who cannot secure a slot in the mosque are given rukhsah and are to perform dhuhr prayers at home instead. The arguments of this second fatwa was running in great detail. First, on the permissibility of safe physical distancing, the fatwa quoted Sherbini's view that filling up the gaps between congregants and the first row is recommended only before forming a second row, but it is not a condition for the validity of prayers. Second, under rukhsah awarded to those who are exempted from attending Friday congregational prayers in mosque, the fatwa quoted a hadith narrated by Tabrani that Ibn Mas'ud said that the Prophet said that those who miss 2 raka'at of Friday prayers should perform 4 raka'at of dhuhr prayers instead. On the permissibility of conducting Friday congregational prayers before zawal, before noon, before dhuhr time, the fatwa quoted 2 testimonies of Salama and others that Friday congregations with the Prophet had completed before zawal. And lastly, on the permissibility of multiple rounds of Friday congregational prayers in a mosque, the fatwa argued on the limited availability of the space due to the application of safe distancing procedure, and on referring to the fatwa of Darul Ifta of Egypt and that of the European Muslim Council for Fatwa and Research that allowed for several rounds of Friday congregational prayers in a mosque. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, the above description shows that there are similarities and differences between the ulama of Indonesia and those of Singapore in their fatwas related to Friday congregational prayers in the era of COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of their legal pronouncements and their arguments. Their fatwas showed the responsiveness of the ulama in both countries to the challenges of the pandemic. They also showed the supportive nature of the ulama to their respective governments' efforts to contain the pandemic. They also demonstrated similarities in their legal pronouncements on the validity of wearing facial masks during prayers, the validity of observing safe physical distancing between congregants while praying, the shortening of the periods of sermon and prayers, the adoption of other precautionary steps to make sure that the congregational prayers will not cause the transmission of COVID-19 virus, and the permissibility of performing only Dhuhr prayers at home in lieu of the Friday congregational prayers in mosque based on the guidelines produced by health authorities. Methodologically speaking, the fatwas of both countries have similarities in applying the concept of maqasid al-sharia, the quotation of Quranic verses, the quotation of hadith, the quotation of some legal maxims, and the quotation of the works of past and modern scholars. The only difference in this regard is in the frequency of applying legal maxims. The Singaporean fatwas used it only once, while the Indonesian fatwas use legal maxims in a more frequently manner. Another difference is that the Singaporean fatwas made references to the fatwas of modern fatwa institutions such as Darul Ifta of Egypt, while the Indonesian fatwas did not do so. In terms of the legal decisions made, the most striking differences are in 5 legal pronouncements. The Singaporean fatwas made valid multiple rounds of Friday congregational prayers in a mosque, while the Indonesian fatwas forbade it. The Singaporean fatwas made it permissible to conduct Friday congregational prayers before Zawal or before noon, while the Indonesian fatwas did not discuss about it, but most likely forbade it because it was outside the madhab of Shafi'i. The Singaporean fatwas made it compulsory to apply a booking system to attend Friday congregational prayers to secure a slot in the mosque, while the Indonesian fatwas never mentioned about it. The Indonesian fatwas constructed some sorts of zoning to which Muslims are attached to its relevant legal pronouncements, while the Singaporean fatwas did not do so. Certainly, the Indonesian fatwas needed such a zoning idea because of the vastness of Indonesian territory. This means that people living in areas or neighborhood with low rates or high rate or uncontrollable rates of COVID-19 infections were offered different legal pronouncements to be accorded the rukhsah not to attend Friday congregational prayers, but to substitute it with Dhuhr or noon prayers at home. Last but not least, the Indonesian fatwas made it obligatory for those who were already detected positive of coronavirus to do self-quarantining before receiving medical treatments in hospitals. It is clear that different social settings of Indonesia and Singapore have driven their ulama to different legal pronouncements and arguments. In other words, fatwas may serve as a source of the social history of Islamic law in a particular region and at a certain periods of time. Wallahu a'lam bissawab. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum.
And I wouldn't summarize the speech since the professor present and very well organized. Now we have about very limited time, about less than 10 minutes. So before I already said that we have about 10 minutes for our discussion. Now to simplify our discussion session, I will offer for 3 participants to deliver their question. And should you ask the question, please raise your hand through the reaction facility beneath your screen. And I will select randomly 3 of you. Thank you. Okay. Committee. You have to please mention who raised their hand. Is there any participant who want to ask the question?
Digunakan 18 bahan, dilakukan mulai dari pertama.
What?
Hello, Doctor. I'm audible. You can hear me?
Okay, please, what?
Okay. Okay, thank you for your time. Okay, my name is Fatwa Number. I'm lecturer in Open University and I'm studying PhD in University of Malaya, Malaysia. My question is about sustainability of law of Sharia in social pandemic in era. Firstly, many obstacles and many differentiation with normal and pandemic. From Imam Ghazali, we know about Maqasidus Syariah. And then he described and explained for 5 Maqasidus Syariah, Hifdzuddin, Hifdzun Nafas, Hifdzul Aqal, and extra. My question is, what the number the first from 5 Maqasidus Syariah? If the one is Hifdzuddin and number 2 is Hifdzun Nafas, what the first? Hifdzuddin or Hifdzun Nafas in pandemic situation? I will explain in Malaysia why if the Sholat Jum'ah Friday prayer in Malaysia to WNA or negara asing is forbidden until now. The reason is because of the WNA is spreader from COVID-19. The government, the reason is hifdun nafas is the first, and the second is hifduddin. Okay, this is my question. Please explain about my question. Thank you very much. Jazakallah.
Okay, thank you, Fuad. Is there any other participant to ask the question? Ada yang nanya. Okay, Professor Atta, would you please to respond directly to the Fuad question? Prof. Atta, would you please to unmute your audio?
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Fuad, for the question. I heard, I read it, I watched on YouTube that in Malaysia, foreigners until now are not allowed to participate in Jum'ah Friday congregation prayers in mosques because the prayers are basically for locals. I'm not questioning the rule or fatwa, I don't know, but I think first we may need to make some ordering of priority between those 5 maqasid al-Sharia. And secondly, I think we need to do some rereading of the maqasid as well. Let me do my own translation of the maqasid. I think if the nafas is, of course, should be given priority over others. But when I say hifdhuddin, I would translate it now as the preservation of the freedom of religion. So this is not only about Muslims, this is also about other people who may adhere to different religions. That's my translation, the preservation of freedom of religion, that hifdhuddin. Hifdhun nafas, of course, the preservation of soul, directly and indirectly from any danger. Of course, the discussion is what constitutes the threat to the nafas. Hifdhul aql, I would translate it not only, the preservation of aql from, say, being drunk, but also the preservation of aql from being jahil, from being ill-informed. So hifdhul aql means also the training of aql to the best of the quality. Hifdhul nasl also, I would extend the translation, not only hifdhul nasl, your own child and your own grandchild, but we are talking about the human species. Hifdhul nasl means the preservation of human species. Hifdhul mal, certainly the preservation of wealth which is in your possession, and also the preservation of wealth which is in others' possession. And the Vice President suggested to add 2 more. I think they are worth considering. But ulama already mentioned about the 6, namely hifdhul bi'ah, the preservation of the environment. Environment, of course, you can have also natural environment, physical, and also you have social environment. I think to put the priority of the preservation of soul on everything else is a correct step to take according to, in my view. Thank you, Mr. Fuad. Thank you.
Okay. Because we run out of time that we couldn't extend our discussion. And I hopefully still request Professor Muzhar to recommend further studies, because I find that your presentation is very, very beneficial for our research, especially in the area of the sociology of law. Prof. Muzhar, would you please to state very briefly what the further studies would be extend following your research?
Thank you. Well, first, at the level of comparison, of course, you can always do this comparison with other countries as well. Indonesia and Singapore, Indonesia and Malaysia, Malaysia and Singapore, Indonesia and Pakistan, and so on and so on. This is always a fascinating area. Comparison in terms of the legal opinions, comparison in terms of the way they put the arguments, and also comparison in the way they reacted to certain social settings. Yeah, when I wrote this paper, I remember Humphrey, you know, his book was like, I forgot the title, I think Islamic History, a Framework, which basically he was arguing that fatwa, meaning fatwa documents, fatwa notes, can be used as a source of writing history, in this case, social history. This is one thing. The comparison is always fascinating to do, and it opens your eyes and how they would react to different social settings. Another issue would be the comparison also with some international fatwa institutions. Another issue would be the identification of what are the issues that were given fatwas by these institutions rather than other issues. So these are some of the lists, I think, that you could walk through. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Atta Muzhar. Just before we end this session, and the committee will award you the certificate, and then the Dean of the Faculty of Sharia in Law will hand it to you. On behalf of the Dean, Pak Sahrul Adam, would you please?
How do I receive it?
Thank you, Mr. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nur Yamin. The certificate awarded to Prof. Fatwa Muzhar. Thank you for your share and thought for this event. Thank you very much for your speech. It indeed provided a deep insight for Islamic law in Indonesia. We hope that we can meet again in another event. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, now the certificate already mentioned in the screen.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, we applaud for Professor
nice.
Atta speech. And last but not least, me as the chair of this session, I will apologize for my deficiency leading this session. Wa akhirul kalam wal afu minkum wa akhirul kalam wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Bapak Nur Yamin Aini, for leading the session. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we come to the second plenary session with invited speaker session. The session will be delivered by Professor Dr. Mashkuri Abdillah from Faculty of Sharia and Law, UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, Jakarta. This session will be led by Ibu Dr. Mashrofa. Ibu Mashrofa, the time is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, to all participants and the guests, it is 5th International Conference on Justice, and I would like to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Masrofa Gemesi. I will be the one as a moderator. We will lead this session for the second invited speaker, Professor Dr. Mashkuri Abdillah. Before we follow the paper, which will be delivered by Professor Mashkuri Abdillah, I would like to read the curriculum vitae of Professor Mashkuri Abdillah. Professor Dr. Mashkuri Abdillah, he was born in Kendal, Central Java, on December 22, 1958. He's a professor of Islamic law in the field of fiqh siyasah, the Faculty of Sharia and Law, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Jakarta. And his educational background, is a doctoral program from Hamburg University, Germany, Islamic Studies at the Department of Middle Eastern History and Culture, 1995, and postdoctoral program in Bonn University, Department of Oriental Studies, 1998, and visiting scholar postdoctoral program from Boston University, Department of Anthropology, 2002. And currently, Professor Mashkuri Abdillah as a special staff for the Vice President of Republic Indonesia, period 2019 until 2024. And today, Professor Abdillah will deliver his paper, which has a title or theme about jihad and terrorism in the perspective of Islamic law, counter-terrorism and deradicalization in Indonesia. And I would like to inform to all participants of this ICLG that Professor Mashkuri Abdillah, right now, he is still in Papua. And today we'll share the video recording based on the paper that he'll deliver today. Okay.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to express my deep thanks to the committee of the 5th International Conference on Law and Justice that invited me to be speaker in this conference. The title of my paper is Jihad and Terrorism in the Perspective of Islamic Law, Counter-Terrorism and Deradicalization in Indonesia. The emergence of a lot of violence and terrorist attack in the name of Islam in many countries, especially the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York on September 11, 2001, has created a perception among certain people that Islam is a religion of violence. In this case, the Al-Qaeda, founded by Abdullah Azzam, Osama bin Laden, and Ayman al-Zawahiri in 1989, who promote offensive jihad, was accused to be actor of the attack. The jihadist ideology then spread to all over the world, not only to Muslim countries, but also to Muslim minority countries. The jihadist ideology also spread to Indonesia, especially brought by former Indonesian mujahideen in Afghanistan. They then established the Jamaah Islamiyah in 1993 under the leadership of Abdullah Sungkar, who was at the time leader of Darul Islam, Tentara Islam Indonesia, KW2. In 1998, the leadership of this group was replaced by Abu Bakar Bashir. During the reform era, the Jamaah Islamiyah, the Jamaah Ansarul Daulah, and Negara Islam Indonesia committed a lot of terrorism in the name of jihad, including in the pandemic time. As to combat these actions, ulama and Muslim leaders have made efforts to clarify the Islamic vision and the true concept of jihad to avoid any perception that Islam legitimized terrorism. In other side, government and community leaders in most countries in the world have made effort to counter terrorism and to materialize peace and harmony among social groups. Peace and war. Islam comes from the word salima, which means safe, secure, and peaceful, because this religion introduced concept of salvation in this world and the hereafter, as well as peace and harmony in the context of social and international relations. The main mission of Islam is rahmatan lil alamin, blessing for the universe, as stipulated in Al-Quran, Surah Al-Anbiya 107. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. The blessing is not only for Muslim, but also for humankind and even all creatures. In the context of this life of society and state, the mission is materialized in the form of moral and ethical guidelines as well as social norm. Peace and peace building are mentioned in the Quran, such as salam and silm, which mean peace and greeting. One of them is mentioned in the Quran, Al-Anfal. And if the enemies incline to peace, do you also toward peace and trust in Allah. وَإِنْ جَنَحُوا لِلسِّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Besides, there are words sulh and islah, which mean peace and peace building, reconciliation, or conflict resolution. One of them is mentioned in Quran, Surah Al-Hujurat 9. وَإِنْ طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. If two parties among the believers fall into a fight, make you peace between them. The principle of peaceful relationship is also based on Al-Hujurat 13. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. O mankind, we created you from a single pair of male and female, and made you nations and tribes that you might know each other. Finally, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is who is the most richest of you. It is obvious that Allah used the word ta'arufu, know each other, in human relationship. Allah does not use words such as tuqatilu or tuharibu, which mean mutual combat or hostile to each other. Ta'aruf in the above verse means to know each other. And this will happen if it is accompanied by i'tiraf or recognition and respect for the existence of diverse people and other groups. This means that Islam recognizes the plurality of humankind as sunnatullah that will not change and cannot be denied. This verse implies that Allah created humans in variety of races, nations, and tribes for mutual recognition and mutual understanding to maintain peace and harmony among fellow humans. To create peaceful and harmonious condition, Islam has set obligation and rights of person in public life called human responsibilities and human rights. Human responsibilities and human rights. Muslim intellectual and ulama accept the notion of human right because it is compatible with the Islamic above values. Today, all governments in Muslim countries, as the members of Organization of Islamic Cooperation, support human rights as manifested in the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam in 1990. The above explanation means that the basic relationship between Muslim and non-Muslim is one of peace. At first, war was forbidden, but it was then permitted by the God because the Muslim at that time had been wronged by the infidels of Mecca. Islam recognized jihad in the form of war as emergency measures, which is defensive in nature. This is because a country needs military force that functions to defend itself from external threat and to maintain internal security. Since Islam also contains a doctrine about the life of the state, it is logical that Islam provides a number of provisions regarding this war or military action. All ulama agree that jihad in the form of defensive war is a religious obligation, and the majority of them are of the opinion that this obligation is fardu kifayah or collective obligation. Islam only permits war or military action if the other side has initiated war against Islam or Muslim, as stated in the Quran, as stated by Quran Al-Baqarah 190. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ. Fight in the cause of Allah, those who fight, but do not transgress limits. Thus, Islam justified war as part of jihad to defend oneself against enemy's attack or against aggression from others, to defend the independent homeland and to defend freedom of religion. Although Islam permits the waging of war, it prescribes certain war ethic which must be adhered to by the Muslim forces. It is true that there are several verses that literally introduce offensive jihad, as recommended among others by Said Qutb and Abdul Azzam, namely Al-Quran Surah Al-Anfal 39. وَقَتُلُهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةٌ وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ كُلُّهُ لِلَّهِ. And the second, At-Tawbah 29. قاتلوا الذين لا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ولا يحرمون ما حرم الله ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. Fight those who do not believers in Allah and do not also in the last day, and they do not forbid what Allah and His Messenger have forbidden, and do not believe in the true religion, the religion of Allah, namely the people given Al-Kitab to them. The jihadist group make the above verses as the basis for offensive jihad or attack, which is in many cases take the form of terrorism. Nevertheless, if you understand the above verses contextually, especially Asbabun Nuzul, they exactly introduce defensive war. Clearly, the jihad is different to terrorism or irhabiyah, intended to create state of terror in the minds of particular persons or group. If the target of jihad is enemy, the target of terrorism is public, including innocent people. Violence and terrorism recently committed by particular radical groups that identify themselves as Islamic groups are forbidden and considered as crime of robbery or hirabah or rebellion or baghi. This action constitutes an Islamic attitude or even contaminate Islam itself and contrary to Islamic history, concerning terrorism in de-radicalization. The emergence of religious motivated violence and terrors committed by a particular Muslim group is not purely caused by religious factors, but rather by economic, political, and social ones. In Indonesian context, the emergence of religious radicalism and extremism has threatened democratic consolidation, which has begun in 2004. They have taken chance in the existing freedom to express and to propagate their radical and extremist ideology. They disseminate their ideas in several mosques as well as through websites, several of which belong to the extremist groups. They threaten seriously human rights because many of them behave intolerantly and even committed violence and terror against other groups considered as enemies. They are influenced by a transnational Islamic movement in the Middle East, especially Al-Qaeda in Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, Indonesian Mujahideen Council, and Hizb ut-Tahrir, as well as the Islamic Defenders Front, or FBI, in some extent can be included into radical groups or hardliners, although the latter is neither based on the radical Ikhwani nor extreme Salafi ideology. The Jama'ah Islamiyah, influenced by the Al-Qaeda, the Jama'ah Ansar Tawhid, influenced by the ISIS, and the Indonesian Islamic State and II, originating from DI or the II, are included into extremist and terrorist groups. The government has tried to prevent the spread of ideas that are potentially intolerant and can threaten the state ideology and national unity. Likewise, the government has also taken legal action against perpetrators of terrorism, the radicalization of those who have been exposed to radicalism, and counter-radicalization of groups of people who are vulnerable to radicalism. In this program, the National Counterterrorism Agency, or BNPT, is the leading sector along with related ministries and state institutions. This effort are also supported by religious leaders, mass organizations, non-governmental organizations, and universities, especially religious universities or Islamic universities. The largest group of this program include community of places of worship in the form of sermon of da'wah activities, community of educational institution, either school, madrasa, or universities, a community of civil servant and the military or police, and community of state and private companies. Counter-radicalization is an effort to fortify a person and a society against radical and extreme ideas, which is carried out mainly through educating the people so that they are not influenced by radical or extreme ideology. In this case, the ulama as well as Islamic leaders and activists are required to socialize moderate Islam or wasatiyah and to avoid religious radicalism or extremism, which easily cause other group of being shirk, heretical, or even infidels. Meanwhile, de-radicalization is one effort to raise awareness of someone who already has radical or extreme ideology, especially those expressed in the form of violence or terrorism. The de-radicalization programs, which include identification, rehabilitation, re-education, and socialization, are aimed to target group, namely those who are inside the prison and those who are outside the prison. The de-radicalization program for terrorists in prisons is carried out in the form of educating and dialogue with them, especially related to Islamic teaching about jihad, amar ma'ruf nahi munkar, and the state ideology. According to data of the National Counterterrorism Agency, or PNPT, during the period of 2000 to 2020, about 1,900 terrorists were arrested, but only about 1,300 people participated in the de-radicalization program. And those who succeeded in the de-radicalization program were about 1,000 people. While the terrorists are in the prison, their wives are given capital and business assistance so that their families can live normally. Assistance is also given to former terrorists who have finished serving their sentences and have successfully undergone the radicalization program in the form of providing capital assistance so that they can also live normally and do not return to being terrorists. The conclusion: it can be concluded that the main mission of Islam is blessing for the universe, materialized in the form of moral and ethics as the core of Islamic teaching. In accordance with this, Islam promotes peace and harmony in the life of society and state. It is true that Islam introduced the concept of jihad, but its true meaning is struggle for self-defense, improving human dignity, and liberation for humanity. Nevertheless, the process of modernization and globalization, which brought about conditions and situations that are partly inhuman or un-Islamic, have made certain Islamic groups, especially Al-Qaeda and ISIS, behave extremely and even committed violence and terrorism in the name of jihad. The jihadist ideology then spread to all over the world, and hence the United Nations and many governments in the world set a policy of counter-terrorism. In Indonesian context, the government and religious leaders have made measures of counter-radicalism and de-radicalization through security as well as legal and cultural approach. In this case, religious leaders and organizations have also responsibility in countering violence and extremism as well as introducing moderate and peaceful Islam. All parties, including the government, politicians, religious leaders, as well as mass organizations and other civil society organizations, need to understand and be aware of the danger of radical and extreme movement that can threaten tolerance in people's lives and can threaten state ideology and national unity. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Berapa halaman?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the topic which has just delivered by Prof. Abdullah, very interesting, talking about the jihad and terrorism in the perspective of Islamic law, counter-terrorism and de-radicalization in Indonesia. But I would like to apologize that because this is a video recording, we can open the discussion or question and answer. So if you still have some question about this topic, you can send the question through the email, which already shared by the committee in the chat room. And Prof. Abdullah will respond or answer soon after this event. Thank you so much. Okay, this is the end of the panel's keynote speech, the second keynote speech from Prof. Abdullah, and I will give the opportunity to the next third keynote speech. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Ibu Mashropa, for leading the session. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we come to the last plenary speech before panel session. In this occasion, the plenary will be delivered by the Honorable Professor Timothy Lindsay from the University of Melbourne, Australia. The session will be led by Dr. J.M. Muslimin, MA PhD. Mr. J.M., the time is yours. Pak J.M. Muslimin, please unmute your speaker.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have already 2 sessions before now. So now this is the 3rd session of the invited speakers. And in this international conference on law and justice, we are indeed very lucky because we have a distinguished professor from Australia. As we know that Professor Tim Lindsay is not new for us, especially for the Faculty of Sharia and Law, because he has visited us several times, and I think he has close contact with some Indonesian lecturers, especially from UIN. Professor Tim Lindsay has more than 100 publications. Those publications are dealing with Islam, Indonesia, democracy, and of course, concerning with Islamic law. And today, he has a specific topic for our discussion. It is Indonesia, Sharia, and the benefit of Islamic diversity. As we know that when we study Islamic jurisprudence, no one will say that there is no different legal opinions among the scholars, even among one scholars or many scholars from one school of thought or madhab. Therefore, there is a proverb in Arabic word, we say, ikhtilafu ummati rahmah. Qawli sawab walakin yahtamilu al-khata. These traditions, recently, we know that some of the scholars say the Islamic diversity can be called as hearsay, but as it is rooted in our Islamic jurisprudence study, we can find it many discussions. And those discussions related to what we call it as ikhtilafu ummati rahmah, those discussions has so many opinions. Therefore, the focus of our discussion today is Indonesia, Sharia, and the benefit of Islamic diversity. So it is fundamental topic. We want to know and we want to explore it. Therefore, please have full attention to the lecture delivered by Professor Tim Lindsay. Professor Tim Lindsay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak J.M. Muslimin, and thank you also to all my friends at UIN Syarif Hidayatullah, who I hope to see again sometime soon once the pandemic is over and we are allowed out of Australia. My first visit will be to Jakarta to see you. So I look forward to that. Thank you for inviting me today. It's a great pleasure to be here. My topic is Indonesia, Sharia, and the benefits of diversity. One of the key characteristics of Islam in Indonesia is diversity and multiplicity of voices. This, of course, reflects the sheer size and diversity of Indonesia and the historic facts of how Islam entered the archipelago. Gradually, in fragments along the trade routes from South and North Asia, penetrating to different extents in different locations. For centuries, this meant contact with the heartland of Islam in the Middle East was the exception, not the rule. And this had a number of consequences. First, it meant that unorthodoxy was actually orthodox for centuries until colonialism made the Hajj easier in the 19th century and greater contact developed between the Muslim communities of the archipelago and Arabia. Second, this lack of contact for centuries with the Middle East meant that what Recliffe calls the religious imperialism of Arab culture was relatively weaker in the archipelago because Islam was never delivered by foreign conquest. Islam therefore developed in Indonesia with limited features of the culture of the Arab world in which it had emerged. Third, it meant that different and often unorthodox interpretations of Islam developed in different ways in different regions of Southeast Asia, linked to local history and pre-existing local cultures. These came to be seen as a key part of the ethnic identity of those regions, and so were preserved until quite recently, even in spite of the increased piety and uniformity in the Muslim Ummah elsewhere in the world. Fourth, the emergence in the 20th century of a number of major social and political movements based on different interpretations of Islam meant that it became very difficult for nationalist leaders across Southeast Asia to select any one of these as the official national understanding of Islam. In responding to the politics of Islamic identity in Indonesia when the nation was being formed, or the idea of the nation was being formed, it was easier and safer to valorize difference and diversity and preserve it, thus preventing the emergence of a united religious political movement that could be a threat to the nationalist objective. In the 20th century, particularly in the post-colonial world after the end of World War II, the diversity and fragmentation of Indonesian Islam encountered a rising move towards uniformity of belief in the broader Muslim world. Based on the notion of a united ummah, a world community of believers, and tied to growing enthusiasm for scripturalism as a road towards reform, calls for assertion of Islamic identity and reform of unorthodox practices reached Indonesia, significantly disrupting local patterns of Muslim identity and gradually turning Indonesia's long-standing Islamic fragmentation into polarization, which is a process still continuing, again, as Reckless has observed. In the midst of all this, and this transformation which continues, has always sat the state, both pre-colonial, colonial and post-colonial states. This is because Islam has always presented some sort of challenge to the state, sometimes simply because the ulamate represents an alternative pole of authority to that of the state, any state, whether religious or non-religious in nature. This is true of all the post-war independent states in Southeast Asia with Muslim populations. The governments that have ruled Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines since independence have all been essentially secular, regardless of what they may rhetorically claim from time to time. Each of these states has, however, been concerned to influence the trajectory, content, and style of the legal traditions of their Muslim citizens to match wider policy objectives of government and state. And they've usually been quite effective in this, leaving aside regional secessionist rebellions, for example, in southern Thailand, southern Philippines, Aceh, and so forth. They're the exception to the rule of the general success of local Southeast Asian governments in influencing the nature of Sharia among their citizens. These Southeast Asian governments have often been motivated to select and reinvent Islamic legal traditions by a perceived need to respond to challenges that they see as implicit in Islam as a rival pole of temporal authority. In developing legal policies for their Muslim communities, they, like most states with Muslim populations around the world, are frequently preoccupied by the question of to what extent should Islam be formally recognized as a source of formal state-sanctioned law enforceable by the state's institutions. Southeast Asian governments, like other governments, have often, though not always, answered that question by using recognition and enforcement as a means of marginalizing many of the legal traditions of their Muslim communities as independent sources of law. That is, in subordinating Sharia to secular laws, recognizing Islamic traditions, but within the framework of secular law. In doing so, these Southeast Asian governments have chosen modes of intervention that differ between states and even within states over time, but which all share common strategies of institutional and ideological restriction and control, often by co-opting Islamic religious authorities. This is true of Indonesia, where the modern republic has been adept at using its own bureaucratic and legal mechanisms to assert control over the interpretation of revelation. It has done this by close management of the administration of a restricted selection of Islamic legal traditions, interpreting and often altering them. This was a strategy of the modern Indonesian state inherited from Dutch colonial rule. It was state policy for much of Suharto's Orba, when Islam was constructed as a potential political threat to the centralized authoritarian and nationalist state the military had created. Of course, overt repression of political Islam diminished greatly after Suharto fell in May 1998. Many of his government's restrictions on the expression of Muslim identity, political and personal, were lifted soon after his resignation. Since then, much attention has been paid to the so-called Islamic revival, seen as having taken place in Indonesia. Popular calls for greater recognition of Sharia are identified as characteristic of this phenomenon, and the challenges they present for post-Suharto governments have been the subject of much analysis. It is commonly accepted that the Islamization of law in modern Indonesia is a direct challenge to the secular state. And there is little doubt that many garis keras proponents of legal Islamization do seek to make such a challenge. Equally, many of those who oppose them see the hardliners' efforts to win greater formal recognition of Islamic legal traditions as ultimately intended to create some kind of Islamic state. Now, this Islamic state, both groups see, the supporters and opponents, see it as the opposite of Indonesia's essentially secular democracy and its religiously and culturally plural society. The opponents of legal Islamization regard this pluralism as fundamental to the political bargain struck in 1945 that created a unified republic. And they see that pluralism is essential for the continued coherence of a nation state. They rely heavily on the Indonesian state ideology, Pancasila. And the result has been a polarization of the Muslim community towards these two opposite ends of the scale. Not complete, but a trend towards that. Now, I would argue that the situation is actually much less clear-cut than either of the groups at the extremes of this debate would admit. It is not necessarily the case that recent, often successful efforts at legal Islamization have always weakened the state's influence over the religious lives of Muslim Indonesians. This is because if the state in the past stood above and dominated society, in post-Suharto Indonesia, the state now stands in the middle, mediating and moderating the pro-democracy camp, the anti-democracy camp, and the forces of globalization. In other words, both the proponents and opponents of Islamization look to the state to mediate in their favor. Strategies for and against Shariaization in Indonesia are thus usually expressed in terms of state regulation of Islamic legal traditions, not displacement of the state. The strategies of the proponents of Shariaization are marked by the use of secular structures of the state to strengthen their positions. Muslim groups, particularly conservative ones, have, ironically, sought to use the legal mechanisms the state has developed to restrict Islam in their efforts to force the state to accept a normative religious role and, of course, adopt the Islamizing norms they promise. In other words, they now seek to reassert revelation precisely through the bureaucratic agencies of the state they see as having distorted it in the past. Now, as a consequence of this, the state's capacity to intervene in the religious lives of Muslims in Indonesia has in many respects expanded rather than contracted since 1998. And the most obvious example of that is the regulation of the halal process. A pattern is now evident of the state responding to pressure from Muslim groups to revise and expand the scope of Sharia in Indonesia, but usually doing so in a way that keeps Islamic legal traditions within the formal legal and administrative institutional framework of the state. Attempts to create a formal system of law for Muslims derived from conservative Islamic norms that would be independent of the state have almost always been stopped. Accordingly, although Islamic legal traditions have certainly expanded beyond the narrow, limited private law sphere to which they were largely and often forcibly confined under the Dutch, under Sukarno, under Suharto, albeit in different ways and to different extents, post-Suharto regulation and bureaucracy has also expanded with them. In doing so, the state has usually been able to retain interpretive authority and a wide power of intervention, even if these powers aren't always exercised and are often challenged by conservative Muslim groups. A key issue now confronting the Indonesian state, which, like it or not, makes the final decisions about the application of Islamic law in Indonesia, is whether Indonesia's religious diversity should be dismantled and a more unified, state-endorsed understanding of Orthodox Shafi'i Islam should be formulated and applied by the state. This would not be a quick or easy task because Indonesia, although the world's largest Muslim society, has no official Mufti who speaks with the legal authority of the state, unlike Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. And given also because of the intense social and political competition between major Muslim organizations. And this is true even if Majlis Ulama Indonesia sees itself as a national Mufti. It is not a state organization. Its fatwa are not law. And indeed, it's often opposed to the state. And it has many competitors in the fatwa market. However, it's clear that many of the major debates now in Indonesia about Islam come down on the one hand to either attempts to persuade or force the state to endorse one or another conservative orthodox understanding of Islam, or on the other, opposition to that from other Muslims and non-Muslims who insist on pluralism. At the moment, Indonesia is a regional exception because it almost alone has resisted the seductions of state-endorsed doctrinal and organizational uniformity. Indonesia's extraordinary religious diversity, along with the weak states that have always ruled Indonesia and lack strength to select from competing streams of Islam, these factors have protected religious diversity up till now. It is clear, however, that the uniformity and enforced orthodoxy are a path many other states with Muslim populations in the region have gone down in order to manage Islam, and that this is also a future option for Indonesia. Now, I want to warn against that today. And the best way I can see to make that warning is to give an example of the one state in Southeast Asia that has been most successful in using the coercive power of the state and law to impose a uniform conservative orthodox understanding of Islam. It is the opposite of Indonesia. It is repressive and stifling and entirely incompatible with democracy. And I refer to Brunei. And I just want to look now briefly at the way Brunei manages a state monopoly on fatwa as an example of a road that I think Indonesia should try to not go down. Brunei Darussalam is an absolute monarchy, one of very few in the world. The Sultan is king, prime minister, minister of defense, minister of finance, minister of foreign affairs and trade. He's head of state. He has full executive authority. He has ruled with sweeping emergency powers since he succeeded to the throne and still does. He's one of the richest people in the world and the second longest reigning monarch. Brunei has a legislative council, but it is a rubber stamp body that has only a consultative role to the Sultan. All the members are appointed by the Sultan. The constitution says no criminal or civil proceedings can be initiated against the Sultan in an official or personal capacity. No decision of the Sultan can be reviewed by a court. He cannot be required to provide reasons for his decisions. There is no political alternative, no political opposition to the Sultan in the tiny kingdom. It's an absolute authoritarian monarchy. Brunei is also one of the few states in the world that officially calls itself Islamic. Since independence in 1984, the Sultan has been able to expand and deepen his political power, largely by equating his royal power with Islamic orthodoxy. The Sultan is the official guardian and protector of Islam and tradition in Brunei. He's the head of Islam in Brunei. He's the chair of the National Religious Council, the equivalent of the Majlis Ulama. The head of the office of the Mufti, together with its legal committee, the legal committee of the Religious Council, which is responsible for the issue of fatwa, is under the Sultan's control and is part of his department. The Sultan has formulated the country's official ideology, Melayu Islam Baraja, or Malay Muslim monarchy, which the government insists must be practiced by all. The absolute authority of this monarchy is enshrined in this ideology of Melayu Islam Baraja, which equates sovereignty and political legitimacy of the Sultan with Islam and Malay identity. And that has allowed the Sultan to co-opt the legal system and Islamic religious authority. This is clear from the way fatwa operate in Brunei. The state has a complete monopoly on the issue of fatwa in Brunei because only the state-appointed legal committee of the Majlis Ulama and the Sultan can issue them. It is a criminal offence to issue a fatwa in Brunei without state permission. So state fatwa in Brunei face no formal competition from fatwa produced by any other Islamic organisation. This is, of course, the exact opposite of Indonesia, where non-governmental organisations entirely dominate the issue of fatwa. There are two sorts of fatwa in Brunei, binding and non-binding. Three possible officiators, the Mufti, the Religious Council, and of course the Sultan, who can direct the Majlis Agama to issue a fatwa. Fatwa that are published in the State Gazette, which can only be done when the Majlis or the Sultan request it, are automatically legally binding. They are therefore actually a form of legislation. The Mufti's fatwa-making powers are subject to the powers of the council and of the sultan. Both the council and the Mufti can refer questions directly to the sultan where special grounds exist. And if the sultan makes a determination in relation to a fatwa put for question, the Mufti must follow the sultan's determination. In other words, the national Mufti must follow the sultan's orders in relation to fatwa if the sultan is consulted. This means the sultan is the pinnacle of authority and control in fatwa making in Brunei, whether they are binding or non-binding, whether laws or just ordinary fatwas. And as I said, it has been an offence in Brunei since 1955 to issue a fatwa without permission. So the penalties, the criminal penalties that can be imposed in Brunei for unauthorised fatwa have completely eliminated the chance of any competition with state-endorsed fatwa approved by the Sultan. They therefore, and this is important, they have stifled any real debate about fiqh and the interpretation of the scriptures. Islam, in other words, is determined not by the ulamate, but by the sultanate. So let me conclude. What is the result of the takeover of Islamic law by the government in Brunei? Yes, it has created the imposition of a form of Sharia. Yes, it has created an enforced religious orthodoxy. Yes, it has led to uniformity in Islamic interpretation with other sects banned. No theological challenge is possible in a system where the Sultan is the head of Islam and alternative interpretations are heretical. Any questioning of state policy on Islam as a form of political dissent, a challenge to the national ideology that equates the monarchy with Islam and Malay identity. It's subject to severe criminal sanctions. It is consequently impossible for Islamic movements or other groups to express alternative understandings of Islamic legal tradition in Brunei. In other words, the end of dissent has meant the end of debate. And I would argue that Brunei is an extreme example of what can happen as a result of the current trend across Southeast Asia for Islamizing groups looking to the state to legislate to enforce Islamic law through state laws. Eventually, that does not empower the ulama, but it grants almost complete control over fiqh to the state. Then Islamic law becomes a weapon for the state to entrench power, as the Sultan has done in Brunei. This supports what Abdullah An-Naim has said, that any Sharia principle enforced through the coercive authority of the state, I'm quoting, ceases to be part of the normative system of Islam and becomes an expression of the political will of the state. This does not mean that Sharia principles cannot be a source of state law, but that the outcome of the enactment and enforcement of principles by state institutions is always a matter of secular law and detaches itself from Sharia as the religious normative system of Islam. An-Naim's comment applies. This means, in conclusion, that the proponents of legal Islamization anywhere in Southeast Asia need to be very careful, as while they may think they are controlling the state when they introduce Sharia, more often they simply give the state more power still. Islamization often leads to the state taking control of Islamic thought. And that is why I think Indonesia's model of free and chaotic debate between very little regulated organizations, very large but unregulated organizations, I think this is the best example of true Sharia in the whole Southeast Asian region. As the Quran says, difference of opinion among my community is a sign of the bounty of God. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Tim Lindsay. There is very deep analysis from the heterogeneity of Muslim scholars' opinions. And if I am able to assist the participants to understand, I think there are 2 points, significant points. The first is Islam or fatwas or anything related to the legalization of Islamic law in Indonesia will end to the absorption of what we call as conservative Islam. And this conservative Islam is let's say, under the control of the power. So the power will interpret Islam as it is happens in Jerusalem, or on the contrary, the legalization of Islamic law within state law remain as what they call it as disruptive era. It means that Indonesia as a chaotic Islam, unmanaged Islam, but it has hope for the future that Indonesia will give and contribute significant and substantive Islam to the state, and it can be a model for other Muslim states as well. I think from my point of view, if I may interpret the speech from our professor, so tends to be what I have said. But I will give a chance for the participants to ask questions, express comment, and so forth and so on. And you may ask also in Bahasa Indonesia, because as I have introduced you, that Professor Tim Lindsay is long-serving director for the Center for Indonesian Law, Islam and Society at the Melbourne Law School. So his Bahasa Indonesia is very fluent. Okay, please. Khairul.
Ya Pak, dulu Khairul. Mungkin, tapi sekarang sudah begitu lama sejak saya di Indonesia sehingga bahasa saya agak turun sebetulnya.
Okay. Khairul, I saw that you want to ask something. Khairul Anwar, yeah? Are you here? Oh. You have asked me through WhatsApp that you want to have time. Okay. Other participants, you have 10 minutes. Yeah, we have a session for question and answer, more or less 10 minutes. Okay. Munadi, yeah, Munadi. You have a question? Oh, Munadi. I think no one will ask questions.
Ya, takut kali.
Oh, takut.
Atau malu.
Tidak, malu. Tidak ada ketakutan sekarang. Sudah berlalu masa-masa ketakutan, ya. Sudah berlalu. Khairul, once again. Khairul, yeah. You have asked me, or do you have trouble, maybe the internet? Are you here, Khairul? Khairul Anwar.
Sir.
Oh yeah, okay. Yes. Okay. You have time now. Yeah, please. You may also ask in Bahasa Indonesia, ya.
Asal jangan bahasa Prancis, jangan.
Ya, jangan bahasa Prancis. Ya, silakan. Ya.
Sorry, just now my connection.
Suaranya bisa dibesarkan sedikit, Pak Khairul? Agak kecil sekali, ya.
Sorry, just now, sir, my connection is trouble.
Ya, okay.
By the way, I don't know. I want to ask about what.
Ya, silakan, Pak Khairul. Suaranya tidak ini ya. Ya. Silakan.
Suaranya tidak muncul. Apa di mute ya? Di mute.
Oh ya. Pakai bahasa Indonesia aja ya?
Ya, silakan.
Saya ingin menanyakan tentang ini ya. Langkah-langkah yang lebih preventif mengenai hal yang kita hadapi di era sekarang yang berkenaan dengan tema itu. Itu saja
Ya.
dari saya.
Langkah-langkah preventif.
Iya.
Aha, supaya tidak terjadi legalisasi yang nanti ke arah konservatif tadi ya. Oke. Langkah-langkah preventif supaya tidak terjadi legalisasi hukum Islam tapi ke arah skriptural dan konservatif. Kemudian diambil alih oleh kekuatan politik. Nah, kira-kira begitu maksudnya tuh. Ya.
Oke.
Baik. Mudah-mudahan Pak Tim sudah menangkap ini ya.
Bisa.
Ya, oke. Baik. Yang lain, Pak
Can I try
Konon.
and answer?
Ya. Silakan.
Yeah. The big issue is that the state should not give way to the temptation to choose a particular interpretation of Islam and then apply it. Because if it does that, then it has to use the power of the state to enforce it. And that turns Islam into a matter of state security and law enforcement. And the experience of other states in the region, and in particular in Brunei, shows that when that happens, Islam becomes a matter of state politics rather than of religious identity and debate. So in order to prevent falling into the trap of religious authoritarianism in the hands of the state, what needs to happen is that reformers should not seek that their interpretation be officially adopted by the state as a matter of state law and handed to the state to enforce. And one of the biggest threats, the first step towards that detachment of Islam from the community and turning it into an aspect of the state, is to create a national Mufti, which is a state institution, and to give fatwa, legal authority, as a form of legislation or other form of regulatory determination. That is a path that has been followed in many other regional states, and it would require in Indonesia the state to repress many aspects of Islamic communities, the way they operate, the way they organize. Muslim organizations would effectively become enemies of state once the state makes that selection. One of the things that most clearly identifies Indonesia was a decision, for whatever reason, and the reasons are political rather than religious, but decisions made by nationalist leaders early on not to select a particular form of Islam as the religion of the state, or indeed not to pick Islam as the religion of the state. And that has been maintained ever since because rulers of Indonesia, contrary to public perception, most governments and states have actually been weak. Even if they rely on military or other backers, they do that because they're weak. And they don't have the capacity to enforce a selection from Islam like that. Now, that is a pattern that has been of huge benefit to Indonesia because it has guaranteed that Islam in Indonesia is a matter that continues external to government, even though government is involved. It's not controlled by government entirely and has made it much richer. It's also made it much more fragmented and chaotic, but we should not fear that chaos and fragmentation within Indonesian Islam. So in terms of steps to avoid a monopolization, the answer is to avoid government control of the institutions of Islam.
Yeah, okay. Then it is clear to avoid government control to the Islam or on the Islam. So there is no only one interpretation of Islam, and it becomes official interpretation of Islam absorbed by the state. I think a short conclusion is that. The next, please. We still have 3 until 4 minutes.
Can I ask question Pak JM?
Okay,
To Pak
silakan.
Tim.
Ya, siapa nih?
Zen.
Oh, mashallah. Yeah, okay.
Welcome,
welcome.
kabar?
Our new PhD. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I
Yeah.
just graduated.
Yeah.
Just graduated 2 weeks ago, Pak Tim.
Okay.
Good to see you and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Pak Tim, I completely understand with your point, but there is, I think, the dilemma within the let's say modern state system where nation state try to always tempted, as I say, try to monopolize everything, ingin mencengkram semuanya karena itulah hakikat dari negara.
Betul.
Memonopoli bahkan violence, they have to monopolize violence. Dan karena itu misalnya mau tidak mau, you like it or not, in some aspects of religion, state also control it. Nikah misalnya. So, for example, if you are Muslim but you are not Shafi'i and you want to try to go to the court and you want to go to marriage with or waris when you divorce with your wife, not in accordance to Shafi'i, which is mostly in Indonesian legal, let's say, marriage law, how you resolve this kind of dilemma? There is the good notion of diversity, thing like that, but in other aspects, sometimes you have to resolve something, and to resolve something you have to decide. Ini misalnya also this is a dilemma also for deciding the Idul Fitri. In one aspect, it is good, to have Idul Fitri, different days, Muhammadiyah, Sabtu, and Jumat, misalnya. Well, that is a proof of Indonesian diversity, but at the same time, it's confusing for Ummah. And also, if you are working for international organization, you have to wait until the exact time to have, permission to offer on your work, for example. Now, how you resolve this kind of dilemma,
Yeah.
Thank you,
okay. Thanks, Pak Zezin. Short answer is, yeah, I agree that disagreement about the day of Idul Fitri and so forth can be inconvenient and annoying and difficult for people. Of course, it's a lot better than being arrested and put on trial because you don't agree about the day. That's the point.
Yes, you're right.
Diversity is uncomfortable and difficult and hard to manage, which is why states don't like it. But it is better than the alternative of letting the state make that control and then enforce it on the community, which is what happens, you see. Now, yes, the state does intervene within Islam for a whole range of reasons, usually because it feels a need to control in things such as wealth and economics. So it controls, for example, zakat, wakaf. It controls Islamic banking. It would like to control zakat more and has been trying, but not there yet. And then you look at the rivers of gold from halal certification. Now it controls that as well. So where there are issues that are really important to the state, like money, it increasingly involves itself. It also involves itself in marriage and divorce because they are what states need to manage, families, relationship structures, so it can control waris and so forth. So it's forced to do that as a matter of administrative practicality. Now, the problem is that as proponents of Islamization try to push Shariaization, they always do it by asking the state to enforce Islam. Always. Both young Garis Keras, young Liberal, they all look to the state to make the decisions about which. Now, when they do that, they give more authority to the state. And this is a really agak ironis, because it means the Garis Keras who would like Islam to be stronger actually give more authority to the state without realizing it. So every time they push for Islamization, Shariaization, the consequence is that the state gets more power over that area. And we've seen that happening. Now, the reason I've made my presentation today is to say, you need to be very careful. If you want Islamization, you need to stop asking the state to do it, because the next step is probably the state taking control of fatwa and creating a national mufti. And when that happens, the game's over.
Thank you, Patin. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And congratulations, Dr. Zezen.
Yeah.
Terima
Okay,
kasih.
Dr. Zezen. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. The last. I think this is the last time we give time for Professor Atta Mudhar. Yes. I show that he raised his hand. Please, Pak Ato.
Thank you, Pak JM. Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. I have a little question here on the issue of the unification of Islamic orthodoxy. In particular, we have in Indonesia a document called Kompilasi Hukum Islam.
Yeah.
Compilation of Islamic law. You know this, of course. And for the ulama, this is seen as a consensus of Indonesian ulama on these three main issues. It was taking place as in a presidential instruction in 1991, and then socialized to justice pengadilan agama, Islamic courts, and the courts. The judges of the court, Islamic courts, are now using this document as a reference to their decisions. Now, my question is, what would be your comment on this process? I mean, on this phenomenon? It was seen as a consensus of ulama in the first place, and then socialized by the state, and then used by the judges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your question. It's a really good question. I wish we had 2 hours.
Thank you.
Then we could talk about it, because the Kompilasi Hukum Islam is a very interesting document, and it's part of a long tradition of codification of Islamic law that begins with the Majallah from Ottoman Turkey, which was the great attempt. Now, all these codifications are very interesting because they are a selection from Islamic traditions, state-endorsed selection from Islamic traditions to put them into a modern legislative form. They take fiqh, select from it, and create a modern regulation in the form of a secular law. And that process involves selection. But what's interesting here is the selection was not done directly by the state. It was done by ulamas working in partnership with the state to create that selection. And it was a very restricted selection. It's private law. It's basically marriage, divorce, children, warisan, and a few other little bits and pieces. And as I said before, the state almost always seeks to codify family law where there's a Muslim community, because it's so important for family structures which are bureaucratic, a bureaucratic unit that states need to use. They need to know when people are married to each other, when children are legitimate, how inheritance goes. So if you see any codification of laws, it's almost always at first in family. Then it might go to issues like perbankan or nanti halal or whatever, or zakat wakaf, but it always begins with family law. So Kompilasi Hukum Islam is an example of that sort of codification. It's been very successful, mainly because it is not highly restrictive. It doesn't eliminate alternative interpretations of fiqh. It just creates a system by which the states can administer marriage. For example, it doesn't necessarily fix the ceremony for marriage. It requires that there's a religious marriage which is then registered and recognized. So it's actually quite a hands-off document in terms of interpreting fiqh. It makes selections from fiqh, but it's not all that rigid in how it applies them. So it's an example of an Islamization process that has not had a dramatic effect on religious diversity, unlike, for example, creating a national Mufti or a monopoly on fatwa. I could say more, but we probably don't have time. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think we should, yeah, hello?
One more question, Mr. JM.
Oh, okay. Then I ask permission from the organizing committee. Sorry for extending the time because the enthusiasm of our participants. Yeah. Okay. Please, you are the last. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Pak JM. Good morning, Mr. Tim.
Hello, Pak Khairul.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Because there is two names similar with me, Hairul Anwar, so I'm confused. Mr. JM call me or another person. Pak Arto yang saya hormati, Prof. Arto yang sorry I joined late this occasion, but I'm very interested in this seminar or just Mr. Tim, as we know that Indonesia is not a state, in an Islamic state, but I just want comment that because I'm a notary, my profession is notary, so I would like to ask about.
I thought you were writing poetry. That's the other Khairul Anwar.
I'm notary, you know that notary in Depok, yeah. So about land, maybe a right of ownership is. Sorry, I write this. My question is, a right of ownership is a part of human rights, yeah. Or whereas a person has the right to have private ownership that cannot be taken arbitrarily. A right of ownership of land, hak milik, is a basic need of every person in achieving their welfare. In order to manifest people prosperity as one of the state purposes, the government of Indonesia has the obligation to regulate the right of ownership of land based on the principle of justice, because this is a seminar about law and justice, including rights of ownership of land based on the principle of justice, including the rights for Indonesian citizens in a mixed marriage. You know, if Indonesian national woman or man married with another country, so he has give his right to the state. What about what do you think about this?
Maybe I should send you a bill when I answer your question. That is not really a question about Islam. That's really a question about citizenship and rights of foreigners. And Indonesia, across its regulatory system, is quite hostile towards foreigners holding rights in relation to Indonesia. For example, if you lose your citizenship in Indonesia, then you lose your right to hak milik land, and you divest it within a period of time, or else you lose it to the state. So it's a wider question about how Indonesian law treats foreigners. And I think personally, I think Indonesia is out of step with many modern countries. For another example is the fact that foreigners who may be affected by Indonesian laws have no right to challenge those laws in the constitutional court. Only Indonesian citizens can, even though the constitution applies to foreigners in Indonesia, they can't challenge it. Anyway, I could go on. There are many other different discriminatory rules in relation to the rights of non-Indonesian citizens within Indonesia that really go back to the context of national independence in Indonesia and suspicion of foreign interests. But I think it's time for those rules to be reviewed. If Indonesia wants foreign investment, as Jokowi says, it can't maintain those sorts of rules and expect investment to come. So that's a reform for another time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we should end our sessions for these discussions. But before, we would like to hear a concluding remark from Professor Tim Lindsay and further suggestion for further study. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pak J.M. Muslimin. I would just say this, that Indonesia is famous around the world for diversity, and within that diversity, often unorthodoxy. And often this is presented as a problem that needs to be solved. Actually, I think it's a strength within Indonesian Islam. And it is a strength because it means the state has not intervened in people's religious thought to the extent it has in many other Southeast Asian states. And that is why Indonesian Islam is among the most diverse and richest in the whole region, precisely because the state's intervention, yes, it has intervened, but it doesn't control yet. And my final conclusion is, therefore, that proponents of Islamization who rely on the state to Islamize need to be very wary of not taking that last step of creating a national mufti and legally binding fatwa, because that would create a crisis in Indonesian Islam that is political as well as religious. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for Professor Tim Lindsay. Thank you for the comments and questions from the participants. And we end our sessions by reciting Hamdalah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. See you later. And the certificate will be awarded to Professor Tim Lindsay through your students, because you have so many students here. Thank you. See you.
Very much.
Terima kasih Pak Jem.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the students. And especially, I would like to thank Ibu Wendy Triana, who invited me to speak today. Thank you, Ibu Wendy.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. On behalf of the committee, so this is a token of our appreciation for your presentation. Professor Timothy Lindsay, long and distinguished professor, and also our, let's say, informal consultant.
Or your co-conspirator.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Tanpa kita sesudah pandemi.
Sudah pandemi.
Buku Pak Tim, terima kasih bukunya.
Assalamualaikum.
Terima kasih Pak Tim.
Okay, thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Lindsay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Professor Tim and
Thank you.
Dr. J. Muslimin. Before we close the session, on behalf of the Dean of Sharia Faculty, we'll award the certificate for Professor Tim. Mr. Sharul, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. J. Muslimin, and the certificate awarded to Prof. Timothy Lindsay. Thank you for your share and thought for this event regarding Indonesia Sharia and the benefit of Islamic diversity. This should provide wider understanding for us to see the merit of Islamic diversity in Indonesia in your perspective. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam. Okay. Yeah. See you, Pak Tim.
Bye. Goodbye, everyone. Sampai ketemu. Bye.
Sampai ketemu. Bye.
Terima kasih Pak Tim.
Sama-sama.
Yes.
Pak Jem, terima kasih Pak Jem.
Professor Tim.
Ya, sama-sama.
Okay. Next, we're going to share the break room for the break room sessions. The panel sessions. The room 1 will be led by Indra Rahmatullah SHMH, and then room 2 will be led by Ibu Fitria SHMR PhD. Break room 3 will be led by Ibu Windy Triana MA, and break room 4 will be led by Bapak Nur Rohim LLM, and then break room 5 will be led by Dr. Mashrofa. Break room 6 will be led by me, Umi Kulsum, and break room 7 will be led by Dr. Zezen Zainal Mutakin. Break room 8 will be led by Dr. Hamamizada. That's all for the session 1. The committee will share the break room. At the moment, I think you already can see the break rooms. Okay. If you see the what is it? The squares icons down of your computer, you will see the break rooms there. And please choose your numbers of your break rooms. Okay.
Ibu Umi.
Yeah.
Excuse me, regarding the timing, what time should because it's already delayed for 30 minutes, should we adjust accordingly?
Okay. How about we finish at 12 for the discussion?
Okay, that's good. I think, but we have to make sure that the next speaker is informed, so they not wait.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Di break room. Nggak tahu di sini juga nggak apa-apa. Oh iya ada.
Linknya di mana, Bu?
Bapak
7.
masuk ke break room itu ada yang kotak-kotak di bawah.
Iya.
Ya nanti bisa dipilih ya Pak. Saya ulangi lagi untuk room 1.
Link 7. Room 7 di mana? Kota-kota mana, Bu?
Bapak Indra, room 2 Ibu Fitria, kemudian room 3 Ibu Windy, room 4 Pak Nur Rohim, room 5 Ibu Masyrofa, room 6 saya Umi Kulsum, room 7 Pak Zezen Zainal Mutakin, dan room 8 Dr. Hamami.
Yang kota-kota mana, Bu? Room 7. Room 7.
Bapak klik kotak di bawah laptop Bapak tuh ada kotak-kotak, di situ kan ada join audio, ada start video. Nah, itu di barisan itu ada break rooms. Sudah? Iya. Iya, nanti pesertanya sudah tahu. Linknya yang sama. Linknya yang sama.
Maaf, tanya saya ini Susilo Surahman dan Diana Zuhroh itu breakout berapa ya? Kok belum nemu namanya? Kalau moderatornya siapa? Indra Rahmatullah. Tapi masih session 3. Maaf bertanya Ibu.